Now, welcome to the teletherapy debate. Our group today is Kathy White,
Alexis Roy.
Nicole Burgess.
Amanda Lemon.
And Tiffany Thomas.
Tonight we'll be talking about the positives and negatives surrounding teletherapy and coming to a conclusion about what its possible effects are as we move forward in the field of ABA. I will be talking about accessibility and about parent training.
I'll be talking about ethical issues.
I'll be discussing technology barriers.
I'll be discussing lack of support.
And I'll be discussing the effectiveness of telehealth ABA.
According to the Health Resources Services Administration, telehealth is the use of electronic information and telecommunications technology to support long-distance clinical health care, patient and professional health-related education, public health, and health administration. During the pandemic of 2020, many fields began to use teletherapy to provide services when meeting face-to-face was not possible. These technologies continue to impact the way services are provided today. ABA is one of the fields where this technology continues to find useful applications. There is, however, some question about the appropriateness of the services provided. This presentation examines some of those issues that are seen and attempts to compare them in order to determine the boundaries for acceptable use of teletherapy. Despite the rapid growth of the number of board-certified behavior analysis analysts, there still remain many communities where ABA services are hard to find. Long waiting lists exist, as do a lack of service providers in some areas. People living in more remote areas are a good example of this, with many having to drive a considerable distance to receive the services their children need. A study by Yingling et al. In 2022 found that 37.4% of U.S. counties had no BCBAs in them, and 8.2 counties had no BCBAs in the county or in any of the bordering counties. The increase in the use of teletherapy services has benefited many people in these situations. Teletherapy for ABA services usually takes place in one of three formats. In some situations, there is an RBT, a registered behavior technician, who is on site in the home or could be remote by teletherapy as well. The BCBA provides both support to the RBT and training to the caregivers, just as one would see in a traditional in-home or in-clinic setting. In some situations, the BCBA assists the caregiver in providing programming for their child. In other situations, they provide more of a parent support model, just training them in more overall caregiver strategies. Most training of this nature is carried out using behavioral skills training, which allows the caregivers to develop the confidence they need to use the techniques with their children. Nohelty et al. In 2021 reported that teletherapy-based ABA services were effective and should be considered as a treatment modality when working with individuals with ASD. Their study included direct services provided by remote behavior technicians with varying levels of support from caregivers. Guiraud et al. In 2025 reported that a randomized controlled trial design that indicated, along with other available research, that teletherapy is a valid method of providing services in hard-to-treat areas. Savaraman and Fahmy in 2020 showed that teletherapy services are being used worldwide to meet the needs of individuals in underserved regions. Teletherapy, when used correctly, has the ability to provide much needed services to people who do not have access to in-person treatment. In that regard, it is well within our core principles to look to benefit others and treat others with compassion, dignity, and respect. When providing teletherapy services, it is important that we remember to behave with integrity, ensure our own competence in how we are using technology to provide those services.
Hey, Kathy. I had a question. Is there a way to increase availability of services to under-resourced people?
There are a number of initiatives, both in our nation and worldwide, to expand the amount of digital exposure that various areas have. That will be slow coming because the infrastructure is not there in many places to be able to support that. However, if we say that because some under-resourced people can't access what we're trying to provide, that we shouldn't provide it to any, would leave out a number of people who need the services.
I really appreciate that input. Also, is there any research that indicates which model of teletherapy is most effective?
I didn't see any direct research that said one was more effective than another. I did see a lot more situations where a BCBA was either training an RBT or a parent on therapy type strategies as opposed to just general support. I have personally observed therapy sessions where the BCBA was training the RBT on how to provide therapy. But I also have read about the other where it was the BCBA training the parents.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll now be talking about some of the technological barriers. Since COVID-19 pandemic, the use of teletherapy has been more common when delivering ABA services. However, to implement this form of therapy, technology plays a key role. As stated prior, telehealth services can occur in different forms. A BCBA may observe an RBT and/or caregiver implement interventions with the client and give feedback to provide support by either training the parent on different caregiver strategies. They are doing this all while sitting behind a computer screen, however. Overall, the idea of telehealth does sound amazing and gives the opportunity for ABA services to be more accessible. However, Nohetley et al. In 2023 discovered technology barriers had an impact on some families' quality of life. The technological difficulties resulted in families not receiving the full potential of ABA services, as well as more challenges than solutions. Pojamos Ramos et al. And Nohetley et al. In 2023 both addressed similar barriers when it comes to technology. These limitations consisted of individuals' lack of experience with video conferencing platforms or specific devices used to access services, as well as strains on families' internet due to multiple users, there being reduced field of view or audio clarity, as well as the individuals in under-resourced communities lacking equipment to conduct teletherapy. These barriers have led to families feeling more stressed than relieved due to experiencing challenges in accessing devices or reliable internet, as well as causing clinicians to experience difficulties in conducting observations due to technology producing interruptions during sessions.
So, Alexis, I have a question. You mentioned how telehealth therapy was a common form of ABA therapy, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. How can it be argued that it was not effective when it was vastly used during that time of need?
That's a great question. So, while it was indeed widely implemented during that time of need, its prevalence does not necessarily equate to universal effectiveness. I do believe teletherapy was a valuable alternative when families were denied in-person services. However, now that restrictions have been lifted, in-person therapy often provides more consistent improvements in a family's quality of life. By contrast, the inconsistency of technology, such as the poor internet connectivity or limited access to appropriate devices, can reduce the effectiveness of teletherapy. I also want to acknowledge my own personal biases regarding teletherapy. As a behavioral technician, I have been supervised through Zoom during pandemic restrictions. There were numerous instances when I sought immediate guidance on how to respond to problem behaviors that had just occurred, but my supervisor could not provide adequate feedback, either because the client was out of frame or the video had lagged. Technicians are already tasked with maintaining engagement, safety, and rapport with their clients. That adding the burden of camera placement and internet stability can create unnecessary strain and reduce effectiveness. From an ethical perspective, these raise concerns about ensuring proper supervision and adequate support for staff can directly impact clients' treatment quality, specifically based on the BACB Code of Ethics, Code 402.
Thank you. So you mentioned caregivers lacking experience using devices, but how can that be considered a barrier if the solution is to provide parent training?
While I do agree that parent training is a logical solution, we must take into account ethical considerations regarding feasibility. Training parents on device use and video conferencing platforms may help, but logistical barriers such as conflicting work schedules, childcare responsibilities, or limited resources can restrict accessibility. Ethically, practitioners are obligated to consider barriers to implementation based on, again, the BACB Ethics Code, specifically codes 206 and 215. And so to ensure that recommended interventions are realistic and accessible for families, in-person therapy may remain the more ethical and practical option to ensure effective and sustainable services. Therefore, to summarize my argument, while I agree teletherapy provided an important service option during the pandemic, ethical practice requires us to evaluate its effectiveness on a case-by-case basis. We must weigh technological barriers, caregiver feasibility, and the potential strain on both families and staff to ensure that services remain client-centered, effective, and aligned with best practices.
Thank you for that feedback. So now I'll be discussing the effectiveness of telehealth ABA therapy and why it has been proven to produce the same outcomes as traditional in-person services. Many people assume that virtual therapy is less personal or less impactful, but scientific research consistently shows that telehealth achieves equivalent progress. The data is reliable and the generalization of skills is also present. For many families, it has become not only an effective approach, but also a necessary one, especially in communities where access to in-person services is limited. According to Tomlinson and colleagues in 2018, clients who have received ABA therapy through telehealth made the same measurable improvements in communication, behavior management, and daily living skills as those who have participated in face-to-face sessions. Ferguson and friends in 2019 also found that the telehealth sessions were implemented with fidelity and the same behavioral procedures. They produce functionally equivalent outcomes. And in another study with Shi and his colleagues in 2021, they compared the data accuracy, the goal mastery, and the treatment integrity between the in-person and telehealth formats, and they found there was no statistically significant difference. Also, notably, No Healthy in 2021 discovered that 88.9% of the skills taught through telehealth generalized to family members at home, showing that the results are not just happening on screen, but in real life. These findings make one thing clear: telehealth ABA is not just a backup plan or a secondary option, but is a proven evidence-based approach that leads to meaningful and lasting change. Telehealth maintains the same structure, the data systems, and the ethical systems that make ABA effective. The success of ABA depends on the science itself, not the setting in which it's delivered. As Ferguson 2019 stated, telehealth extends the reach of behavior analysis beyond the clinical walls and within the natural context of your daily life. Delivering services virtually also strengthens one of the core goals of ABA, which is generalization, because skills are taught and practiced where they naturally occur. Also, telehealth fully reflects the 7 dimensions of ABA described by Bayer, Wolf, and Risley in 1968. From an ethical standpoint, the Behavioral Analyst Certification Board 2020 makes it clear in Code 2.0 that behavior analysts must use interventions that are scientifically supported and shown to produce results. Telehealth satisfies the standard and also supports accessibility and equity to reducing those barriers under our care. It also allows for clinicians to reach families in underserved and rural areas while maintaining effective treatment and safety. Providing ABA through telehealth is not just about convenience, but is about fulfilling our ethical responsibility to make effective therapy available to anybody that needs it. And I'll admit, I once believed that telehealth could not compare to in-person services, but after reviewing the data, it's clear that telehealth is not a lesser form of therapy. It's an equally effective, ethical, and scientifically grounded method that expands opportunities for families and professionals alike.
Thanks, Tiffany. I did have a question. You stated that the research proves that telehealth is equally as effective as in-person ABA. How would you account for possible internet issues or other distractions in certain settings during sessions? And how would data and progress be maintained and reliable?
Great question. So, connection problems or even environmental distractions don't really change the science of the ABA. It's temporary barriers, not flaws in the treatment itself. Thomason in 2018 and Ferguson in 2019 both explain that effectiveness depends on the fidelity of the ABA procedures, not the mode of delivery. Internet issues can be fixed and sessions can be rescheduled, but the data collection systems and the behavioral strategies remain the same. In fact, telehealth solves a much larger problem: the long wait lists, the staff shortages, and the lack of access in rural communities. When services are planned properly, she and his colleagues in 2021 confirmed that data reliably and that data was reliable and the treatment outcomes remain equivalent to those provided in person.
Thanks. How do we make sure that the data taken by telehealth services is accurate and ethically sound? And how does telehealth compare when you have an individual displaying unsafe behaviors?
So telehealth follows the same ethical and scientific standards as in-person ABA. The data is collected using frequency counts, skill assessments, and inter-observer agreement checks to ensure the accuracy and the consistency, which adds to the sociability of the actual approach. A major advantage of telehealth is that sessions can be recorded, which allows supervisors to kind of review the fidelity and confirm like ethical compliance in a sense. In cases involving like unsafe behaviors and severe behaviors, in-person services may be necessary, but that decision aligns with the ethical judgment under the Code 2.06 of the BACB. However, research does show that telehealth can be highly effective for most clients. Ferguson in 2019 found that live caregiver coaching through telehealth increased parent confidence and reduced challenging behaviors, demonstrating that safe, ethical, and effective treatment can occur virtually.
Thanks for that.
No problem.
I will be talking about a lack of support, specifically regarding challenging behaviors. A lot of what we experience in the field of ABA are challenging behaviors, which are often the most critical targets outlined in the client's treatment plan. Challenging behaviors such as aggression, self-injury, tantrums, or property destruction can not only affect the safety of both the technician and the client, but also those around them. Doing supervision via telehealth creates significant barriers when working to support the technician and client through these behaviors. With the BCBA conducting supervision via telehealth, there are many different variables that fall into the lack of support they can offer. This includes not only programming, but mentally and physically. As RBTs, we can all think of a time we have required support with a client from a BCBA. With the support, we were able to ensure the client's safety and effectively implement behavior plan procedures. When BCBAs do supervision via telehealth, we lose that hands-on support and the help we receive is very limited. Think of a time when a client was physically aggressing toward you. In that moment, you are focused on de-escalating the client and protecting yourself and the client. When challenging behaviors are occurring, it can be difficult to communicate with the BCBA in the moment, also limiting the support from them because more than likely you are not holding the device for the BCBA to observe for the BCBA to provide any support. Timing is also very critical in ABA. Effective feedback and support in the moment is much more beneficial and effective when handling challenging behaviors. Thomas and Broadhead 2023 explained that when BCBAs are not providing feedback, it is likely that this will affect the organization and ultimately result in them being dissatisfied and leaving the organization. When supervision is done over telehealth, it is less likely we can give feedback in the moment where the BCBA can step in and provide alternative ways or encouragement. Live modeling in ABA is one of the most effective and direct forms of support. In Ramos et al. 2023, clinicians reported extreme challenging behaviors with coaching caregivers different strategies via telehealth. When we do not have the opportunity for BCBAs to demonstrate difficult teaching strategies, prompting procedures, or implementing a behavioral intervention plan, it increases the likelihood of misunderstanding or simply not retaining what we should be doing at that moment. Telehealth completely dismisses this opportunity and support. Rather than showing what to do, they are only able to explain, leaving room for errors. Working to reduce challenging behaviors without any support can feel overwhelming and at times dangerous. When we are experiencing these emotions consistently with a client, we are less likely to perform in a way that the client is deserving of. This lack of support not only affects the RBTs, but the quality of services we are providing to the client.
Excuse me. You explained that there are barriers with BCBAs having the ability to support during a challenging behavior. How do you think a BCBA could alter their supervision strategies to provide consistent and effective support when a challenging behavior arises?
Thanks, Kathy. Although conducting supervision via telehealth does include different challenges during intense behaviors, it is important to consider ways BCBAs can modify their supervision. They can ensure that RBTs are prepared with step-by-step protocols and role-playing scenarios. BCBAs could also schedule more frequent supervision or one-on-one meetings with the RBT to ensure feedback is being provided. Overall, preparing before the behavior occurs would be the most effective outcome.
Since live modeling is such an important part of supervision, what are some ways we could bridge the gap between live modeling and modeling via telehealth?
Great question. I love the idea of the BCBA recording themselves implementing the intervention so the RBT can refer back to the video when needed. Another possible solution is the BCBA can implement a standard process such as the BCBA agrees to review within 24 hours of the supervision to ensure any programs or targets that were added can be reviewed and modeled prior to implementing them.
Thank you. Caregiver training is an important facet of successful ABA services. The BCBA and RBT can only be involved with the child for a short number of hours during the week. It is important for caregivers to be able to be trained using the same techniques when they are alone with the child in order to help them maintain their success. Caregiver training using teletherapy services has a few benefits. It allows for training to be scheduled in a time that works for the caregiver. It allows the caregiver to be able to focus on what is being said in the training rather than having to keep track of the behavior of the child at the same time. It also allows the BCBA to use more detailed training models in order to make sure that the skills being taught are well understood. In terms of scheduling, being able to schedule a teletherapy session means that the caregiver can schedule at a time that they can be there. They don't have to allow extra time for traveling or wait until they can get someone to help them get to the appointment. They're also able to schedule at a time that maybe a sibling could be helping to keep the child busy during when the BCBA is providing direct training, and yet be able to have the child be able to be involved in the training when it's time to demonstrate a newly learned skill. This could be an RBT providing direct services as well. And in that case, the RBT could also then be involved in the training to learn how to utilize those skills better as well. Being able to focus on the training is important in order to make sure that training is understood and can be implemented successfully by the family. During teletherapy training, the BCBA is able to go into more in-depth training procedures than they may be able to go to when the parent has to solely attend to the child and help with their behaviors. Behavioral skills training is often used to teach skills to caregivers in a structured method. This instruction, written description, modeling of skills, practice of role playing, performance feedback, and watching for mastery has been used to teach RBTs and parents the skills needed to help their children. And this model works very well over teletherapy as well. Garreau et al. Demonstrated in 2025 that training therapies to carry out services using teletherapy was successful.
Thanks, Kathy. So how will you make sure they're actually doing the strategies explained to them right? And if they are already overwhelmed as parents, how much time will this training actually take?
I think that being able to monitor a parent's performance would not be that much different than in the clinic itself, where they would have to perform that same skill for the therapist to show them that they understand that how to perform that skill. The benefit of it is that they're performing that skill in their own environment. They don't have to reformat what that's going to look like in their own living room as opposed to in a training room at their clinic. As far as a family that's in a state of overwhelm, it's important for us to always be watching for when our families are overwhelmed and make sure that we're not asking too much of them. But I think that the ability to not have to transport, travel, and schedule things during lunch breaks and all of the different things that would be involved with trying to get to a clinic for a training session, I think that those are actually helped by the fact that by doing them over teletherapy, we can alleviate some of those stressors.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Last question. Parent training through telehealth can seem effective in a supervised setting, but how can you be confident those methods carry over once the structure and supervision are gone?
And again, I think that it goes back to the fact that we have to assume that whether we're training in person or whether we're training by teletherapy, because we give that training in the clinic and we just assume that the family is going to be able to take that home and do it again at home. If we can present that training when they're at home, we have a better chance that that training will carry over to their home environment.
Thank you. All right, I'll be talking about ethical issues. Everyone knows there has been an increase in telehealth supervision within the field of ABA. While it may be convenient for supervisors and accessible for families, in many cases it causes more harm than good. As BCBAs, we must carefully consider the ethical concerns and the risk telehealth poses to our clients. We have a professional obligation to provide the best services for each client, and too often telehealth supervision does not uphold that standard. Starting off, a lack of clinical competence is a serious issue. Pamals Ramos et al. In 2023 found that nearly 40% of ABA clinicians reported not having formal training in telehealth. This is a very large percentage as it represents almost half of our field delivering services on a platform they are not trained in. This directly violates Code 5.0, Scope of Competence, and Code 5.04, Maintaining Competence. Providing telehealth supervision without the right preparation limits the quality of services, increases the chance of mistakes, and places clients at risk of harm. Without proper training, clinicians may not know how to adapt treatment plans to a remote setting, how to handle technological failures, or how to coach staff effectively online. In short, they are practicing outside their scope, which is both unethical and dangerous. Telehealth can also lead to ineffective treatment delivery. Clients with severe challenging behaviors such as elopement, self-injury, aggression, or limited communication skills require immediate and direct intervention, which is something telehealth supervision fails to do. According to Code 2.01, providing effective treatment, we are obligated to ensure that the services we deliver are not only effective based, but also effective for each client. If telehealth limits our ability to deliver interventions or monitor the technicians, or staff performance, then continuing it is unethical because it wastes valuable intervention time. And we all know how important each session is, as it creates opportunities for skill development, communication growth, and behavior reduction. Telehealth also fails to minimize risk of harm. The BACB Ethics Code 2.06, minimizing risk of harm, ensures that client safety is top priority. Remote supervision removes the layer of protection that in-person staff can provide. If a serious crisis occurs during telehealth, the supervisor cannot be there physically to block, de-escalate, or provide safety measures. That is a major ethical risk. Lastly, confidentiality risks are magnified with telehealth. Under Code 3.03, protecting confidential information, we must safeguard private health and behavioral data. Unfortunately, telehealth supervision can take place on unsecured platforms with family members walking in the room or in homes where people are listening. There is also the risk of data being stored, hacked, or recorded without proper protection. Unlike controlled clinical settings, the home environment makes it harder to protect client privacy, putting client dignity and confidentiality at risk.
Thank you, Nicole. So, question, if nearly half of the ABA providers report not having any formal telehealth training, how do you justify delivering telehealth services? Because those practitioners are practicing outside of their scope of competence.
So it is important that BCBAs and our supervisors are strict with their communication. Although telehealth has its limitations, supervisors need to work closely with the RBTs, reviewing programs before sessions and explaining them properly, practicing intervention plans for aggressive behaviors, and also involve the parents in the planning and be there to support and create a plan when those behaviors happen in the family setting. It is important to know that telehealth does not replace hands-on or in-person supervision. And if the clients are continuing to have aggressive behaviors, it should be limited to in-person supervision for everyone's safety.
Thank you for that feedback. So, additionally, how can telehealth supervision meet the same ethical and quality standards if supervisors themselves are not adequately trained in that delivery model?
This is a great question. There are secure platforms that have been created. There are several safety protocols and procedure strategies and telehealth specific trainings that can all be viewed as ethical by our BCBA standards, which should be mandatory throughout all the places that are providing this therapy. When following the right trainings and steps for telehealth, it does increase the safety. It helps increase the safety for everybody.
Thank you, Nicole. So, in conclusion, telehealth therapy has many advantages. Families can receive services at times that are convenient for them and receive training on how to carry out interventions in their natural environment. However, there are obstacles that we must also overcome, such as providing support to staff and caregivers, resolving technical problems, and putting ethical considerations into practice. Though these can all be addressed with extended caregiver and supervisee training, as well as clinicians reflecting on their ethical standards to uphold client dignity. So I just want to say I appreciate your time and your patience, and thank you for listening to us and learning today. Thank you. And these are our references.